Hello everyone! I cannot tell you how excited I was when I first heard that they were releasing Frosted Pine Candle to the Snow Day collection for Bath & Body Works White Barn Candle Company. When I heard Frosted Pine, I thought of Frosted Tree, which was a fragrance from 2010, I believe. Yeah, 2010. It only was out the 1 year, and I really, really loved it. Fresh Balsam will always stick out as my absolute favorite, pine between the 4 to 5 that they do at Bath and Body Works. But this one was definitely a second favorite, quite different from Fresh Balsam, and I really, really loved it. It was more of an herbal, sort of old-time antique-y sort of tree. Back in 2010, I think they had Evergreen, Frosted Tree, Fresh Balsam, and maybe just a tree scent or fragrance, which was sort of just a random mix of a few different pines. But Frosted Tree only came out in 2010, and then 11 and 12, it was not to be seen. But then, of course, I heard Frosted Pine, and I'm thinking, okay, if it's Frosted Pine, it's kind of got to be Frosted Tree. So more on that in a second. First, let's dive into this one. So, Frosted Pine, part of the Snow Day collection. Again, not sure if this is a scent that's going to go wide or not. It's a little bit weird, a little different from sort of the more standard pine scents. What's interesting is that it's not in the White Barn Winter collection, which most of their pine fragrances, Evergreen Apple Garland, Autumn Snow, Winter Wreath, those are all within the White Barn collection. So to see one here in the Snow Day collection was a little surprising. Other than this, I believe only Fresh Balsam is in its collection, and again, that's just like an absolute huge seller every year. So obviously, that's going to be, one of the major players with the pine fragrances. But getting back on track, Frosted Pine here is just a nice, bright, intense green wax, sort of your standard outdoor, view there with a pine tree, a fence with some snow on it, and Frosted Pine reads as: this wintry blend of pine needles, balsam, and a hint of sugar evokes the fragrance of an evergreen tree laden with snow. So now when I read that, I thought, okay, well, it doesn't seem like Frosted Tree. I'll show you Frosted Tree. I loved it so much back in 2010 that I held on to it and could not finish burning it. I don't even think I lit it last year. But you see here, Frosted Tree, it was back in their old style labeling, very similar, just a pine tree with, get some focus, pine tree with some snow on it. And the notes back then were rich cedar, fir needle, and golden amber, blended naturally with notes of patchouli and rosemary. Now this is right up my alley. So you've got your pines with your cedar, your fir. Golden amber, I don't usually love, but when used appropriately in small amounts can be really nice. Patchouli, again, same thing. Everyone knows what that smells like when they smell intense patchouli. Not a fan of it on its own, but blended appropriately in a candle, it can be really wonderfully sort of earthy, resinous, warm, comforting fragrance. And then, of course, rosemary. I love all things herbal, so you throw rosemary in it to make it green and herbal and astringent and just very, very aromatic, and I'm head over heels about it. So reading the notes, it was like, well, either they're just catering to people who don't like herbal and want something, sugary. They say that Snow Day is sugared sap. There's nothing particularly sweet about that candle. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe they're just saying sugared for the folks who like sugary things. Because Frosted Pine, outdoors, an outdoor tree is not going to be particularly sweet, at least sugary. It's going to be, your sap, but not a sugary. So that was a little strange. But sniffing it, it's nice, but it's really strange. I actually bought 2 of them because I was worried that it was going to be a scent that was a test scent and didn't go wide, and it was close enough to Frosted Tree. When I was smelling it in the store, I wasn't sure if it was an exact match. I don't think it's exact, but it's very close. And I'll do a comparison in a second here. But let's look at first what they're saying we should be smelling. So they say pine needles, balsam, and sugar. And it's supposed to evoke a fragrance of evergreen tree laden with snow. So, evergreen tree, sure. Balsam, a slight bit of that. Sugar, no, there's nothing really sweet about this candle at all, so you can throw that right out. But there's let's compare it more to the notes that were on the frosted tree, because I believe those are probably a little bit more accurate. I would say I would get a bit of cedar. Not sure if I get amber. Maybe, because there's something surprisingly warm about this candle. Where you get candles like Snow Day and Fresh Balsam that are very cold smelling candles, like it really makes you feel the whoosh of air like you're outside. There's something warmer about this, and it could be either patchouli or amber. I think more towards something like amber, because it's very sort of thick and heavy on that side. A sort of thick heaviness of woods, a little bit heavy with either an amber or patchouli, again more towards a sheen of amber, not a heavy amber, or rather amount-wise. I'd say amber is always heavy in my opinion, but the amount of amber is small in this candle, if any. Don't really get as much herbal in this one as I did in Frosted Tree, which bums me out. And there's something about this, so it basically smells like, mostly as far as the pine goes, evergreen. Let me compare it to the evergreen candle, just of course, the classic standard evergreen here. It's actually less sweet than evergreen. Frosted pine is much earthier, damp, dirty. It's really a dirty smelling candle, which I kind of like because it's so unique. It's not super crazy woodsy like you would, the woods you get from Fireside or anything like that, but it really just is earthy. So not like leathery or hickory or woods in that way, or a men's cologne, but just a true outdoor damp earth kind of note to it. Almost remind me of something that could have been in the Slacken & Co. Forest collection from a little over a year ago. Now, evergreen, again, is like a pure, sort of bright, true, classic evergreen. There is a lot of evergreen in this, but it's less bright. It smells dirty in the way that if you were to bend down at the base of this tree, let's say, give it paint the image of you're out picking your Christmas tree for the season, you're sawing it down yourself. You're down, you're kneeled down at the trunk of the tree, and you smell the bark, the wet bark, the dirt that's around it, the snow that's around you, and you smell, of course, a lot of the sap or the resinous, the sap basically from the tree, perhaps some pine cones or the neat pine needles around you, but you heavily smell the damp bark and the earth that this is around this tree, the dirt. So it's really interesting. And when you smell this on its own, and I keep sniff, it really is not a true. It's not really it's not a musty or bad smell of earthiness. And I like for wines I like barnyard musty dirty earthy wines. I'm not drinking a sweet Moscato or something. So of course I do like those darker sort of natural scents across the board, whether it's wine or candles or body fragrance. But even for someone who likes that, I am seeing that it's not purely that. Like, it is still an evergreen candle, but there's definitely a good 20-30% of this that is just a weird note. And I think it's a mix of probably amber, maybe patchouli, and just sort of damp earth, which I just think it's so interesting, because in some ways this is very unique, or rather, authentic, because you smell fresh balsam or evergreen, and they're a nice pine candle, but they're sort of what we think pine should smell like, or what your Christmas tree would smell like. Whereas if you want like a pine tree, a frosted with snow pine tree out in the woods, this I actually think is almost more what it would smell like. Now, comparing it to Frosted Tree, now this is going to be a little bit tough simply because it's been burned, it's 3 years old at this point, and from sitting around for years, the fragrance gets a little bit off when you sniff the lid. When I burn it, I'm sure it'd be fine, but just sniffing the lid, it's a little bit off. Frosted Tree actually I like it better, and I think that Frosted Tree actually would sell better. I think it's more accessible to people who are looking for, sort of a classic Christmas tree scent. Frosted Tree, I'd say, is less evergreen than frosted pine. Yeah, it's less bright, and evergreen's not a particularly bright candle to begin with. But frosted tree is more about, there's the tree in there, but it's more sort of a generic tree. Pine tree, of course. They say cedar, fir needle, and the amber, patchouli, and rosemary. This is much more of sort of that herbal side of things. So it's the tree, but it's more, I think I originally thought of this, and I describe a lot of sort of pine scents this way, but I think I described this in the past as sort of a scratch and sniff Christmas tree. And I know that sounds weird, and probably only works in my mind, but for me it's like, I know that when I was young, I think my grandmother gave me an old, like, Christmas book that was my mom's. So of course we're talking, back in the 50s or 60s, and it was like a little, child's book where it was the cardboard pages, and you turned it, and there was one page had Santa with like, like a fake fur, sort of little real beard, sort of like a cottony beard, and then you turn the page, and there was probably, a little piece of a pine cone on there, and then you turn the page, and there was a scratch and sniff tree, and it really smelled sort of like a classic old-fashioned Christmas tree, and that's what I get from this. It really is an authentically herbal, just every sort of scent that you'd want coming from an old-timey Christmas is what you get in the frosted tree. So I wish I could tell you to jump out and run out and buy this, because it's just so fantastic, while still leaning a little towards the way that the herbal side for people who love herbal scents, without being like astringent. But again, I don't know where I was going with that. Anyhow, frosted pine is close to that in that it's got the same sort of subdued pine with unique notes that aren't just pine or woodsy or outdoorsy, sort of generic. Not using generic in a bad way, but just not standard or typical notes that you find in a pine or pine tree or evergreen candle. But this has such a strange damp earthiness, so I do like it. It's similar to frosted tree, not as good as frosted tree, a little dirtier, but very, very unique. I hope people like it. I hope it goes wide and people enjoy it. But comparing that to fresh balsam and evergreen, it's definitely the strangest smelling of the trio there. So I guess that pretty much covers most of this. So again, not my beloved frosted tree, but a close second, with the interesting, sort of earthiness thrown in. So I'm happy they didn't go with the overly sugary sweet version of it, because that would bum me out. I like that they sort of went a little wild and a little strange with the notes in this one, even though they didn't list those notes in the description of the candle. So that's about it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, hit me up below, and until next time, take care.